So there's a level of vulnerability that comes with that, but in reality it's in relationship to the work that we're doing and how we're going to push the boundaries of knowledge so that we can sort of effectively take advantage of what's in the room in order for us to be able to make our contributions and the projects that we're working on sort of better and better, right? So we've only got this short amount of time to do it, and there's an incredible amount of content, rich content within the day for us to be able to move through it. So things like breaks and those types of things, we can keep them really tight to ensure that we're kind of back into it and connecting with each other. The openness of information is really the other piece here, right? How are we ensuring that it's not necessarily about your ability to share right now or your willingness to share right now, but what happens after this, when you've had the time to reflect on where those connections are and how you want to bring people into sort of the problem solving that you're a part of. So how this lives after this is going to be really, really important, not only in terms of contacts, but how is it that you're going to apply your thinking through the day as it percolates to be able to apply and improve the project that you're working on. Does that make sense? So it kind of beholds a responsibility that's just bigger than the information sharing, but what else is going to happen? And that's the last part of the day is we're really going to focus on how is this community going to support itself and what is required in order for us to be able to move this really neat movement, continue to move it forward, and who are the players within it in order to be able to support that. Does that make sense? Right? We're all on the right track. I'm in the right room. Right? I really want to thank Seth for asking us to be a part of this. It's been wonderful to sort of curate the back end and then also research a number of you and understand what it is that you're doing. And this is sort of the best part of my job is that I get to explore these spaces in which I don't necessarily have a huge relationship to, but I understand sort of its impact, and to have this level of reflection and activity within this space and all of you in one room, I think is really, really exciting. We're talking about there's another event. MG Futures Labs is having an event today in Drake Valley, right? So like this is cool. We're talking about the idea that these conversations are happening much bigger than ourselves. And that the ecosystem continues to sort of push itself up. And there's other things happening.
If you're able to stand in front of the camera, the people on live stream will be able to see.
You know what's funny is we even talked about this. I'm like, what can be done in order to ensure that the people in the live stream piece can have the best experience? And they're like, talking to the microphone and be in front of the camera. And I did neither of them, right? Sorry, Seth. Great. So part of this, instead of a traditional introduction sort of system where we're all getting up, you're going to have a chance to meet each other throughout the day. And so the goal is really to be able to comb through everyone before the day is out and not just have these sort of static opportunities to be able to introduce ourselves. But you are going to introduce yourself to your table. And even if you know each other, I think there's an opportunity when you answer this question for you to get to know each other a little bit better. But you're going to introduce yourself by name, the organization that you're with, and you're going to share sort of why are you interesting. Okay? So have 30 seconds to think about that, and then you're going to go into your tables and you're going to introduce yourselves and answer that question. So why are you interesting? Okay, go.
I know we all do.
Some people emailed at the last one. Sorry. Oh yeah, no. I mean, whether it was someone called it like 9 or 30. Oh, and so I think it's going. People are watching though. That's good.
That is good. That is really good. Okay, you've got 1 more minute, so speed it up if you haven't gone through everybody. be a bubble. Okay. Has everybody had a chance to go? Yes, finish up. Who's the most interesting in the room? You. No. Appreciate it. No, that's cool. Pardon me? Oh yeah. Who's right? We should just put an X here for everybody to remember that. Throughout the day, we're going to kind of run into exercises like this. We have a public speaking component to our company, and when people walk in, we have a number of folks that come and see us, real experts in their field. But we only have two rules, and the rules are: if you can answer yes to this question, which is, are you interesting, and are you likable, you can be an incredible presenter, right? And it's sort of like that likability and that interesting part. It's like, why are you interesting? And what are you where's the focus? Where's your mind at right now to be able to answer that question? Throughout the day, as we shift tables and shift up, we're going to give you sort of other random questions to be able to introduce yourself with. So this kind of gives you an opportunity to not only meet other people, but sort of get a different perspective on what they're all about. So now to move into the program, I think probably the most interesting person that I've ever met. It's an easy introduction to bring up Seth here. It's fascinating to be able to be part of sort of Seth's orbit, not only in terms of his enthusiasm for the project that he puts himself in, but his ability to sort of connect and collate information is incredible. So to be able to work with someone like that and put a day like this together and see the contributions that he's made up to now, and just see how this is going to move into the future is really exciting. So Seth, come on up. I know you got a great presentation, and we'll move into our program.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for.
Right here, please.
Right here in I can see wave to the. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone. There's so many people that made this day happen, and I won't get all into that, but definitely a big hand for Avnish for all the work that he's done for kicking us off, and I think getting us in the right lane as well. To Kevin and Devin here at the town of Cochrane, the Cochrane High Sustainability Sustainable Development Club, and all their work. So and for all the presenters, everyone's here. We're going to do a lot of work. So I'll jump into it. My name is Seth Leon. I'm the manager of cooperative services at the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association. We're a member association of co-ops and credit unions. We want to see a strong co-op sector. Where it comes into community generation, and as we're going to learn over the day, is that co-ops are a great way for communities to own something. So I'll leave it at that, but my executive director, Paul Sabaya, is here in the room, so ask all the hard questions to Paul, not to me. Is that all right? Maybe we'll jump into this. So what am I talking about here? Okay, so we want to, okay, thanks. So today we're here to talk about community generation, and I think it's really interesting because it's an interesting category in the space of renewable energy and energy transition. It's basically saying that we're going to put production where people are consuming it, and that does a lot of interesting things. One, it means that Albertans can benefit the most from energy transition. They can own it, they can use it, they can innovate with it, and they can do lots of interesting things that are there. The decision to make a utility scale project or a microgen project, those are different conversations, but community generation is a new emerging space that's very dynamic. We think of, it's not an either or type of example. It's solar or it's wind or it's geothermal and electric vehicles, or energy efficiency. And when we think of some of these big challenges around our energy transition is, how are communities going to benefit? And as well, how are communities going to lead in this space? All of you here are really breaking new ground, innovating with new ideas, and taking on new challenges, right? This is, it's really at the community level, and it has its own challenges to think that, if you're a company like Greengate doing a massive, 500 megawatt project, which is incredible, they do have a lot of resources and teams of engineers to do all this work. This is people in your community who are figuring it out for themselves, and I think that that's really powerful. So I'll just jump to a slide. One of the things that makes me really excited about today. So yeah, a little bit about the day. Community generation, as you're aware, it's part of the small scale generation regulation. I mentioned, it's really powerful. I think that we can, we're looking at the grid differently. We're looking at electric vehicles. We're looking at, how to do lots of different things. And also this question of what happens when we localize clean energy, right? And that's what we're gonna discuss today and look at our own projects. If we go to the next slide. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. And this is what gets me excited to do this work, is this idea that what if we had a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of community-owned renewable energy in Alberta, What would that do for our province, for economic development, for rural Alberta, for the grid? And I think that, this is kind of the North Star that I like to follow, and it's gonna look different for every project, but to be heading in this direction. Go to the next one. So how we got here today, just a little bit of background. Kind of in the fall of 2018, we started doing some capacity building workshops, really general, similar like this, lots of tables and flip charts and people with project ideas. And then we ran a project incubator, and as a result of that, we had about 20 projects in pre-feasibility, and that represents about 80 megawatts. So we're getting towards that 1 gigawatt, slowly but surely. And then, we've been doing a bit of networking and information sharing of just, getting people together to say, what are you working on? What's working and what isn't? How could I apply that to my community and to advance it further, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we gonna do today? I know Av will definitely go further into this, but we're gonna learn a lot, and then we're gonna drill down into it into small groups, and at the end of the day, we're gonna have a larger conversation about, how are we gonna take on some of these bigger challenges, and really, dig into building a new emerging sector. Community generation is a little different than microgen. It's different than utility scale. It's different than energy efficiency, but it all connects into it. But this community of community generators is new, and you're all a part of it. So how are we going to work together? And we'll go on to the next one. Just very briefly on the small groups, because as Avnish was saying, we want these quick transitions and to jump into it. So we're going to have 3 sessions where you'll be in smaller groups, and you'll be sitting with a subject matter expert. You'll be talking about your projects and really, saying, how can this project make the next step? Or what is a problem maybe everyone's facing, and how do we come up with some creative ideas? Because really we want to see people leaving with, maybe a strategy or a new connection or a new introduction, a new idea to bring their work forward. But also 30 minutes isn't a lot of time. So how are we going to get the most out of that? And as well, how do we continue the conversation? In the afternoon, we won't have a formal break, but there'll be lots of snacks and coffee and no beers, but something that'll be out there for us to keep our strength up. And just on to the next slide, and I'll show this one again. So this is kind of what you'll be doing. You'll be grouped kind of based around projects. I know that people have lots of different projects, and everyone who filled out the pre-conference survey to kind of identify, who kind of hangs together, facing common challenges or working in similar areas. And then to the next slide. Then you'll be sitting down with these experts in the 3 different sessions. So we'll have rooms, some tables set up here in the Hall of Vision, in the Willow Room just around the bend, and then in the Sage Room. You'll have more instruction that comes around to it, but in the sake of efficiency, just kind of getting a sense of which group you're in. If your name isn't on the list, don't worry. We'll find you and put you somewhere you need to go. So that's kind of my overview for the day. So I think community generation is really amazing, and I'm so excited to see everybody here today. We're going to do a lot of work today, but this isn't going to solve all of our problems. It's definitely a milestone or a big marker, and we're going to move on from there. So with that, that's it for me. You'll see me, bouncing around all day, but I'm really excited to hear from the projects and the presenters. To start off the day, we're going to hear from Jennifer Treshell, who is with Peters Energy Solutions, and Jennifer has been a part of this community generation work. She did a lot of the preliminary assessments of the projects you're going to be hearing about, as well as was a key part of our community generation project incubator. Just in our formal kind of stuff. She's a professional, or was previously registered as a professional biologist in Alberta, had several senior management roles at Fortis, Alberta, and has a Bachelor of Environmental Science from the University of Lethbridge. But also, I think more important, or for me, as I've gotten to know her, is Jennifer is an incredibly smart, hardworking person in this energy sector and a huge resource to get us where we are today. So I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer, who's going to talk about the big picture of community generation.
Well, thanks, Seth. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate being able to be here. I'll just take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Peters Energy. Peters Energy is a small boutique consultancy, and actually started with our principal, Joe Peters, as a tariff, electricity tariff specialty, as an expert in that. Over time, we've kind of grown into sort of like three spaces, and one is generation development. The second is advocacy, both policy and at a regulatory level. And the third is more getting involved in some of the regulatory work that's going on at the Alberta Utilities Commission to sort of further and enable generation in Alberta. And I have a couple of my other colleagues in the room. I'd like to introduce them. The first is Robert Henry. Robert was the one who worked with Seth and put on the community generation incubators last year, the three of them. And Anthony worked a lot on those as well. So both excellent colleagues of mine. Happy to see them here. So I think when it comes to preparing for this workshop, I had the really exciting and awesome job of talking to some of the proponents directly and understanding what some of their challenges are, some of their opportunities, and some of their excitement too. And I guess that was the best part about the conversations was the commitment and the excitement that people have for these projects and to further them is probably one of the most poignant things. And so I was able to have personal interviews with 5 folks here. The Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley. Joey O'Brien is here, but I actually spoke with, there he is. I actually spoke with Jody Conuel, who can't be here today. Kirk Davis from the Village of Longview. Clem Geo, Charlene Becky. Prairie Sky, Stephen Rutherford, yep. And then Fair Community, Amana Dacia. And then, so what we did in these interviews was I just tried to get a sense of what are the challenges and opportunities for these projects. And they were in various stages of development. A lot of them were early stage, some of them were late stage, like getting ready for almost construction. And what I found was there was some collective challenges and there was some collective opportunities and learnings as well. And because Peters Energy has the benefit of working with various other developers of solar, wind, or other generation, including gas-fired generation, we kind of incorporated some of those insights into our interviews and into kind of how we analyze this information. So I just want to talk a little bit about community generation projects. One of the poignant things is that it's a real mix of developers, and by developers or proponents, I just mean all of you. So there's municipalities, there's community groups, there's co-housing groups, real estate development, there's people who are just developing commercial projects, like Clem Geo, for example. And they have varied goals, but for the most part, they're focused on net zero benefits, community benefits, the concept of energy autonomy for either a municipality, for an organization, or for a group of co-housing folks. Also revenue development and just part of a business portfolio. The sizes of the projects really ranged. It was from a few hundred kilowatts all the way up to 20 plus megawatts. So community generation's got a real range in sizes. Project types that we have in the room, and I think there's more maybe, but the ones that I spoke to were solar and wind, located in Calgary, Pincher Creek, Longview, Canmore, and I know those of you have, others throughout the province. But what really struck me about developers, or this group, is that nobody's really an expert at generation development or community generation development, and that's because it's in a new and emerging industry. And so what people are doing is working collectively to pull together networks of people to form teams, to form experts. And Amon and I had a good conversation about this. Is actually several of you and I had this conversation. Was it's important to pull together sort of that team and work together and figure this stuff out. And so, for the most part, everybody's an entrepreneur. You're an interested citizen. You're a resident of a group. You want to develop a project. but nobody is an expert at generation. Folks are motivated to capitalize monetarily, of course, money talks, but also socially and environmentally, and these are huge drivers for many of you. Many of you believe in energy, in innovation and technology, and a cleaner Alberta, in energy diversification, and also pioneering the industry is how do we learn how to do this? How do we broaden our scope beyond sort of the centralized utility model to more localized ideas and this concept of energy autonomy? And more importantly, how do we sort of make that okay? How do we make that the norm and challenge kind of the status quo in policy and in the regulatory environment? And many of you sort of like have that desire or that thought in the back of your mind. And many of you are excited to do this, to shape the industry and to build models and to build ideas about how to do this and share it with others, other municipalities, other groups, other real estate developers. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of unstress because there's money on the line, you're working with investors and financiers, and it's not always easy. And lots of times the things that you're dealing with are complex and they're difficult. So it can be really challenging. Overall though, what I've heard, and I spoke to this before, was that there seems to be a high value for building teams of SMEs, working together in partnerships, coming together in groups like these, and having these conversations and helping each other along. So here are some of the things that I heard from you, and my favorite one is something that a man said, and he said, I really want to move this province from I love Alberta oil and gas to I love Alberta energy. And that's something that really resonated with me because that's something that at Peters Energy we talk a lot about in terms of diversification of energy for the province and what that means to have small local energy. And so I love that Seth talked about that too. And then another comment, it was actually from Stephen, about stakeholder views are variable when it comes to generation and sort of like the thought about generation, and it ranges from wanting to be advocates for climate change to just pure capitalism, like what's the money, what's my return going to be? And so as we talk about what some of your challenges are, it's actually both of those things. It's building sort of that business case or that value proposition, and the other part also is how do we ensure a return? How do we convince our investors that this is a solid project? So I'll just summarize some of the challenges that I heard. In terms of project feasibility, I'll start with a money talk slide, like the cold eyes of capitalism, as Robert says, is some of the challenges, and a lot of the challenges that people face is the evaluation of project economics. How do we integrate and how do we build an ROI model that makes sense, that takes into account energy revenues, so sale to the power pool, sale to an off-taker, and non-energy revenues in terms of carbon or other values. How do we use that to create a feasibility assessment or portfolio or business case to take to a lender, to your stakeholder group, or to investors to show them that you have a solid ROI model and that it works? How do we create a cooperative model that is a value proposition for stakeholders but also makes sense and provides them a fair return? And many of you are facing that and trying to figure that out. Some of you are also faced with finding an offtake agreement. Charlene and Kirk, I know those are some of your challenges, and I'm sorry to single you out, but you have a couple of the bigger projects. And so going out to the market and finding someone who wants to buy your electricity and enter into a contract, and how to offer them either an innovative idea or a return on investment that makes sense is difficult. And it's finding those people or those organizations, and then it's working with them to find something that's mutually beneficial. And it's difficult. And in Peters Energy, when we work with a number of our clients, including international developers of portfolios of generation projects, this is something that's really challenging for them, and they are constantly working on it. And they're working through their numbers, and they're rejigging and jigging, and that's something that we've learned. And I'm looking at my colleagues here because they're really good at the economic part of the economic analysis part of the work that we do, and we're learning as we go too, because things are changing, prices are changing, the industry is changing. The second thing I want to talk a little bit about is community challenges. And I talked about it a bit before, is how do you market your value to stakeholders, depending on who your stakeholders are. They might be members of a housing group, they might be a condo association, they may be landowners in the area that you're developing a wind project. So how do you develop value for them? Because some may be expecting direct value if they're a member of a cooperative that you're forming. Others are indirect value that you're selling. So they're kind of near the project, like as a resident, but they're not directly benefiting from it. So how do you sell a value proposition? I know that's something that Charlene is really struggling with, is when folks oppose a project, how do you sell them some value of it when there isn't any direct value that they're benefiting from? So that can be a really difficult thing. And when it comes to community benefits agreements, like this is something fairly new, is how do you articulate the value beyond the social, environmental, and sustainability values? How do you actually articulate financial value? So there's like the tangibles of financial and then these other intangibles. And how do you marry those two to create a nice package of value that actually makes sense and makes them feel okay about investing some money? So where to start? Are there templates out there? This is probably something that we can talk a lot about as we move through the day. And then creating membership opportunities. What are some innovative ideas to create opportunities for people to be part of a cooperative or part of an organization that makes sense for them and hits on the value streams that resonate with those folks? And then of course, there's technical challenges, because it's a technical thing to do grid interconnection, and it can be difficult. And I've heard from some of you that figuring out when you're working with utilities to figure out the studies that you need to do, the costs that you need to pay, what your options are, can be extremely difficult. And in the work that we do with clients every day, it's a real challenge to try and navigate that and understand, are you getting value for your money? Are you getting the right studies? Are you doing the right connection to the grid? And by that I mean there's, it depends on the size of your project, but there could be large scale connection, there could be small scale connection. Most of you, I guess, will be distribution generation connected. So anticipating these timelines and costs is a big unknown. And many of you that I talked to hadn't gone through the full range of studies with your utility. And so it's sort of that unknown in your head that what if some unknown cost comes up? What if there's a really high cost or some technical thing that's required? And so this is a source of apprehension. And then there's also the concept that came up of late development risks and unknowns. So because this is fairly new and people are embarking on this, and it can be unique to every project, is what are the unknown unknowns? We don't know what we don't know, and how do we prepare for those things, and how do we figure that out? Like for example, vetting construction vendors was something that came up. Some folks that are putting together community generation projects aren't project management experts or aren't construction experts. So to be able to put together an RFP for a construction project, it's difficult and daunting. So that's just an example of where you pull in experts to find help to do that. So looking ahead, my summary, I guess, is that there's a strong desire for energy autonomy and sustainability for communities and other organizations. There's opportunities for value-enhancing generation, and they're growing day by day as people become involved. And Aman and I talked about it as sort of like a movement to localize generation, to become more independent, to take control of these things and learn more about them. And as these projects get implemented, as we learn, as things get built, we're building repeatable business cases. And they can be shared with others, and that's kind of the point of a lot of the work that you folks are doing in this room. And so the greatest opportunity, I guess, that I see, and it's something that many of you pointed to, was that pulling together networks of experts at various different things, or people who are just passionate and interested and willing to learn and curious, like Devin, can get these things done. And I think that's the strength of like these types of organizations and when we pull things like this together. So that's the end of my presentation, and really that was a primer to get us thinking about our sessions as we move together this or into the day, and I'll take any questions or feedback at this time. Great.
I'll ask a question, I guess. So, you're deep into this already. You see a broader picture. You've got a lot of people here who are starting new or sort of isolated on their island because they don't know where the connections are. Where do you suggest they go to find out? Because when you're in the dark, you don't know which direction to head. Where do you go to find other people to start filling in their knowledge gaps and connections?
That's a really good question, and I asked many of the proponents that question that I talked to, is like, how did you build that network? And a lot of them reached out to consultants, to business people that they knew. It's kind of a word of mouth thing, and it's not like, I guess the trouble is because it's a new industry, like it's not like you can open the phone book and say like, okay, who should I call? I don't know, I guess I'll open that to the audience. Is there any other thoughts? I see Robert pointing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Don.
I was going to say here, like this seems like a really good place to, although it's also a very good place to ask the questions, like over and over, right? This question should be there. And yes, solar Alberta, right? This is a good place for a lot of
One of the things that we find at Peters Energy is that we're constantly learning too, and so the more we get involved in things like ACCA, Solar Alberta, things that the Alberta Electric System Operator puts on, any sort of community or regulatory or policy workshops, we get involved and we find that we build, we're starting to build, I guess, a network of experts. So it's kind of like when we have a question about something, we know who to call, and we're getting to that point. And I guess it's really building that network. And one of the things that, Seth, I'm going to put you on the spot, but one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we make available to others or just to the general public information and learnings that we gather from workshops such as these for the benefit of others. And so one of the things that we're talking about is potentially making that public, that information.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that question. In our case with Prairie Sky, we're just a community of people who live together. There's varying degrees of expertise on, there's lots and lots of collective wisdom in the community, but nobody was a solar expert. And so we were stumbling around in the dark. And our outcome was to partner with a solar cooperative nonprofit called NERO. And they came in, we'll talk about our presentation, but they were really, really instrumental in answering, bombarded them with questions because they were sort of our conduit to that world. And we many times we thought about how it would have been great to have something centralized in some sort of roadmap or streamlined process for people who want to do this, but we're not experts. And so I think this is a really great starting point for that, these kinds of things.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, well, two things. One, coming into the co-op sector, one of the things that I love about my job when I'm doing co-ops is that if someone's starting a co-op and you find a co-op doing something similar and get them on the phone, they're usually up for talking. And I realize, like, after that, not everyone operates like that. But I think we can do that in community generation. It's a bit of a two-way street. I mean, if you're having a busy day, someone comes in and says, explain everything for me. You say, well, can you recommend this? How did you figure out this problem? And that's a two-way street. But I think we're building a knowledge base. And again, like, this is a new, like, the community can have parameters that we want. If we want to be a community that shares information, that's something we can have. As well, I know that there are some of the groups coming out of the capacity building that are developing toolkits, webinars, we have live streams, things like that. So it is starting to amass some of these pieces, but how do we share it? There's a ton of reports and toolkits that sit on shelves, right? It's the fungibility, that's a good $10 word. Their use, right? And that's what we want to see, that we're using these resources and putting them into practice. The biggest impact you can make is having a successful project and then inviting everyone to come and see it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as your projects get energized and put into place, I highly recommend that you do open houses or knowledge sharing sessions in some way. Any other thoughts? Great. Thank you.
Thanks for that. The town of Cochrane, you folks are coming up here. Yes, sir.
Say you're taking a lot of notes, are you gonna have access to this presentation? The entire video feed of the entire thing?
I'll ask the team here.
Yeah, we'll go on the YouTube channel after. Which channel? Okay, that's the YouTube channel. And it'll be linked to all the members? Yeah, it is.
Great. That's excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so big thank you to Seth and everybody for coming out here today. We're really happy to have everybody to get to talk about our project. I'm Devin LaFleche. I'll be presenting with Kevin Shire. We're kind of considered the Kevin Devin team around here. Working on lots of weird, interesting stuff. This is probably one of our most interesting projects, our Cochrane Solar Ranch project. It was part of the Municipal Community Generation Challenge grant application. So fingers crossed. I know there's a couple probably other projects in the room also. Fingers crossed that we get funding. Just to give you a background on Cochrane, population roughly 30,000. It has a well-established tech sector. We have MC Things, 4Eyes, and the national headquarters for Garmin. What this project's meant to do, though, is to establish a green sector, renewable energy. Look at investing in that and actually finding a funding source to sustain that locally. What we're trying to do, too, is also meet our sustainability plan goal to have 30% of our power coming from renewable sources by 2029. Right now, we're not even at 1%. I did bring our local leaders, so they'll be presenting a little bit after us. Here's our project partners, Peters Energy Solutions. They really helped us get through this process, got us a ton of information you're seeing here is from them, and they actually got us started down this road on this project. And it was going to the last workshop like this. So where do you go to start? Places like here are great. We also are partnering with the Stoney Tribal Administration. There are Indigenous neighbors just to the west. We haven't had a long history of working with them. This project, as well as transportation, is where we're actually starting that. So it's about getting a partnership started very early on this. We also have Cochrane High School Sustainable Development Committee. They're here today. Like I said, they're the local leaders. They've been doing this for 18 years. When you look at all of our renewable projects within Cochrane, the ones that resonate, they've done them. So we figured, why not get the local experts in? And then last, we have Rural Routes to Climate Solutions. Evelyn is here today. Oh, there she is. So together, we're trying to create this project that's going to be a catalyst for a green economy within Cochrane. What the project is going to do is create revenue that we can maximize and then reinvest in future projects, training, and education in renewable energy. This will help us diversify our power generation to more renewable sources, helping us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, increasing grid stability, as well as the project's meant to be transferred to other places. We want to share what we're learning. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How would we do it differently? How is our context the same or different than yours? Just to give you an idea of our project, we haven't put the site up. We're waiting till we have some engagement done, or till funding's decided, then we're going to go out and engage the adjacent landowners. But it's a 2.5 megawatt solar farm. When it's on the grid, it's going to be producing or reducing carbon emissions by just over 2,300 tons per year. The site's a 16-acre site within town boundaries, located adjacent to a substation, so a great, easy location. It's a pre-disturbed site in a remote location, no environmental concerns. We're using just ground-mounted solar, low-risk technology, very easy to implement. When we talk to Fortis, grid connect, it's easy to connect to, right by that substation, lots of options on those feeder lines. For the land use, it's urban reserve residential. Ground-mounted solar, luckily, is a discretionary use. We're also looking at some things with a new land use bylaw. We have someone from the planning department here today. So looking at direct control district as well to kind of solidify this as a location. The last thing, we're just waiting for funding to go out to the public and engage on local adjacent landowners as well as the community in whole. And we have our Cochrane Sustainability Committee as part of that. For project timeline, I won't go into too much detail, but if we were to get funding soon, they're going to make an announcement very soon. we should be done by the end of 2021. Optimistically. Won't go through this risk mitigation strategy, but just to show you that this was part of our project, we went through all the different things, looked at a mitigation for each of them, so we can go into more detail for questions. Last, in terms of the project, it's a $7 million project. We asked for $3.5 million in grant funding. We're interested to see kind of what are our other funding opportunities if we weren't to get that grant. What can we do instead? What we're going to do with this project, this is the interesting part, is with our revenue, this $250,000, we're going to be reinvesting it into the community each year. So that frees up $250,000 to either give as grants, loans, and we'll actually be able to produce $6.5 million over the lifespan of the project. So that's where we're using this project owned by a not-for-profit. Kevin will go into that, and I'll pass that over to Kevin now.
Thank you, Devin. Interesting and likable. I think I'm done. So maybe I should just pass it back to Devin. When we started this project, it came about because we were in different groups. Devin was working on his transportation projects. I was working on fiber projects. I was looking at solar lights to have fiber on street lights, and connecting into the Fortis system was expensive. We ran into Peters Energy at some of this. We ran into Seth, and they said, well, you should start looking at where you're going to go with some of this sustainability. And I liken it to a Lotto 649 ticket, and I have 6 digits, and when I'm watching the TV screen, they said, well, where are your substations? Oh, well, they're right here and here. Well, how much land does the town own? Oh, well, there's another digit. We own land right beside 2 substations. And then the next ticket, well, do you have any zoning for that? Yeah, we possibly do. And then we came down to, well, we've got a few numbers left to uncover, and those numbers are funding. We've applied for the grant, and then we have another number, which is public engagement, and we have to get people excited. And that's where a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here are centered around, is that public engagement and how we get our community involved and invested in this project. Everybody who has done anything in any of this space knows about Section 95. Municipalities are not allowed to own projects and have an advantage. And we went down the road of looking at that and saying, we're going to operate as a not-for-profit. And there were really 2 options. There's the co-op option, and there's the option of being a nonprofit. In Cochrane, we have a huge history of working with not-for-profit organizations on big scale. We've got a campground the town invested this kind of money in, and then turned it over to the nonprofit to operate. Our recreation center and pool are all operated by a nonprofit entity, as well as our Humane Society was a big investment in land and money in order to get it up and running. And the town supports all of those and is very comfortable with that arrangement, because generally our community doesn't take our money and run away with it. They just put it right back into the community, and that's what we're after on this project. We're going to create a board that's going to be the partners Devin talked about, plus some community members, and that's going to be our governing body or our guiding light in order to run this project. Before we can transfer any knowledge, we have to create that knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge out there about how you do some of these projects, but not necessarily specific to communities and doing it in the not-for-profit way, in the way that we're trying to do it. We have to learn how to produce the energy, govern and fund renewable projects. That's a big part of our application, is we're not taking the money and putting it into our own pockets. We're going to regenerate that money, and I'm going to talk about that. We have to abide by Section 95. We want to maximize our returns and reduce our maintenance as low as possible. And we want to bring together a bunch of different groups. We have an opportunity to work with our Indigenous neighbors, which we have, as Devin mentioned, have not done very well in the town of Cochrane ever. And we want to also work with the institutional, industrial, and community members. I'm going to talk about that. If you're going to go to sleep now. I'll wake you up when we get to the good part. We need to share that energy, and Jennifer talked about that, or we need to share that information. We will be creating throughout this project, with help from Evelyn and Rural Roots to Climate Solutions, we'll be helping to share, gather, and collect all this information that we create and get it out into it through various ways. And this was all done as part of a presentation asking for a grant money, so there was more detail that we talked about. But engaging our community creating that information and then resharing that information out to answer some of those questions about, we're standing here in the dark, where do we go? We got into this whole solar thing just completely by accident. We just were bumping along in other things, and then it came about. And one of the things we have is capacity. Devin and I have a little bit of time capacity to explore some of this stuff, and it's important in organizations and communities that you find people who are passionate about doing new things and are curious, like Devin and myself, and want to create new things, but also give them a little bit of capacity and talk to the leaders about having a little bit of time so they can work on it. You know, the Google model where they don't do it anymore, I don't think, but you can spend 10 or 15% of your time working on things that nobody understands, except for you. We're going to create a few short-term jobs while we build the site. We're going to create the green sector that Devin mentioned. We're right in the middle of building an innovation hub. We have funding from Devin's on-demand bus system. If you want to talk about transit in small communities, corner Devin over lunch. He can give you all kinds of information on how he's developed an on-demand transit system that is absolutely spectacular, and it's working beyond the numbers that he projected. It's wonderful. We're building the innovation hub as the next 2 floors on top of that transit hub that we're building, and we're tying my fiber optics that I'm opening up to the community into there, which is all town owned, and this all ties into just innovative things in the community. It's not just about solar and energy generation. It's a bigger, broader spectrum of doing innovative things in the community. We're going to increase employment and training opportunities. We're going to have some space to do that in the Innovation Center. We're going to generate some tax on a piece of land that's been sitting empty for about, I don't know, 4 billion years. There's been nothing ever built on it, so it's been there a while. And it's sitting there in the town of Cochrane being owned, and it's not doing anything for the town, and it's not a particularly attractive site. It's under some power lines, it's beside a substation. Nobody really wants to build a house on it. This is a good option. And then we're gonna explore the opportunity of having an energy retailer that operates within town of Cochrane. The town of Olds does that through the Olds Institute. They have an energy retailer that is a nonprofit energy retailer. They sell energy. They put the profits right back into the community. And one of the things we're really focusing on is reducing that economic leakage so that if people are buying electricity in Cochrane, that money goes right back into Cochrane, right all the way out to the retailer and back in. We produce it here, we resell it here, and we put it back into the community here. We could create kind of that sustainable world. Environmental, I don't know that I need to talk a lot about the environmental benefits. One of the big things is that we just want to use this as a trigger to get it out in the community and talk about it more. And it makes it visible, and it makes it so that people are starting to talk about this stuff. Because if we don't have this on the radar, then nobody's ever going to talk about it. We will put solar panels in conspicuous places, but those aren't necessarily ones that are going to produce any real benefit. The real benefit is big projects like this. And that shows that we're a local leader in actually walking the walk and doing what we're supposed to be doing. Obviously, under the panels, it's going to be a fenced-off area, so we're going to use some grazing. I hope for goats or sheep. Sheep, yeah, goats. Goats eat too many wires. Sheep don't eat the wires. But goats will eat more stuff. So if you protect your wires, maybe you can use goats. But we're looking at sheep underneath, just again, in that spirit of getting out there and just talking about things. And I don't want the front page of the Cochrane Times or the Cochrane Eagle to be a gas-powered lawnmower from the Parks Department running around cutting the grass underneath the solar panels. That's a little bit of a picture I don't want to see. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a whole different topic of whether you're going to eat the sheep when they're done at the end of the season. Community engagement is part of our social benefit, which gets the community together and talking about sustainable energy. Workshops and training like this that are hosted locally in all the different communities and talking about things like what Raymond has done and what Longview is doing, and some great big projects and really interesting things. You're going to hear from Cochrane High this afternoon. Stephanie Bennett is one of the teachers at Cochrane High, and she's been doing fantastic work over the past 18 years with the students and doing sustainable projects. You're going to hear from them this afternoon about some of the things they've been working on, or maybe later this morning. But one of the things that I want to stop, okay, if anybody went to sleep, now's the time to wake up. Because this is where I'm going to give you the meat of what we were presenting to Alberta Innovates and the MCACC in Edmonton. What we want to do is we want to generate the money, the $250,000 a year, put it back into the nonprofit. We then want to engage the high school students with local businesses to look at a holistic approach. So the problem is a business has got an opportunity to reduce their electricity use or do something that's sustainable in their business, but they may not have the time to do that. As a high school student today, I think for anybody who's gone through education system in Canada, you can go from high school to university to a master's to a doctorate and never have had a job in the real world. You've studied it to death. And that's a good thing, because guys like Devin come out of that and they do amazing things. But we want to start with those high school students, and we want to have them actually take those real world applications at the high school level, bring that into the curriculum, go to the business who may not have funding to do that development of that project, do the work for them, present it back to the business. At that point, we as a working group know that the business has got a proper business case and study done. They would then apply to this board that we create, and that board will either loan or give the money to the organization to complete the sustainability project. If we do it as a loan, whether it's low interest or no interest, when we do that, we get the money back into the system again, and then we take that first level of greenhouse gases and we turn it into second and third and fourth level greenhouse gas reductions or sustainability objectives in town. As Devin said, we're going to generate about $6.5 million of revenue with this project. We fully expect to have all of that left when we're done, either through interest that's come back at 2 or 3% on those loans, or through the money just returning as capital with no interest. That gives us where we can get off that eternal IV of going and asking for that $3.5 million in the beginning, and we can start building other projects around town. I don't know what those projects are going to be. I can't tell you. But I'm not in the business of telling people how to use the networks that I build. I just build the networks, and then I let them do their thing with it. And that's what we're working on here, is if we build it, we think they will come and it will happen. We want to have open and honest, respectful dialogue. We want to really work with our Indigenous neighbors to the west, because we have an opportunity here to say, hey, if you've got access to the land and you can get near a substation, these are some of the projects you can do and return a lot of that benefit into your community. And some of that hasn't happened in the past, where we think that there's an opportunity to develop that model and see how that can work out. And then, of course, back to Jennifer's comment of I love Alberta oil and gas as opposed to I love Alberta energy. And that's one of the things we really want to highlight is how can we do this? Devin took out a slide, and the slide had how much 2.5 megawatts was in the Alberta overall number, and we were 0.0005% with 2.5 megawatts. So Alberta Oil and Gas doesn't have anything to worry about that solar's going to knock them off the top of their castle anytime soon. But it's all about that discussion to say, how do we blend these things together? How do we make it so that we're a little more sustainable, one bit at a time? Because eventually we have to get there. And as we become more and more self-sustaining or locally producing our electricity, we can get there. And that's one of the things that we really want to focus on as part of our message out in that knowledge sharing is we're not the enemy here, and it's not us versus them. This is all about energy production and how we move forward. And that's a big part of how the Cochrane High kids come into play in this, and I'm looking forward to their presentation this afternoon. That's everything I have for our presentation. Do you have any questions for Devin and I on that, or if we even have time for questions on that?
For sure.
A couple minutes?
Thanks.
Any questions for anyone on that aspect of it?
Do you have the cost per megawatt installed that you pegged?
Robert, can you answer that question? Peters Energy worked with all those numbers.
Yeah, AC project, 2.5 megawatts, $7 million was the budget, so we're around 2.8 million.
So what's the cost per watt?
2.8 cents, or $2.80.
$2.80.
We're $1.58 right now.
At what scale?
400 kilowatts.
Any other questions for us on anything
How
to
do you
do?
think the community's gonna receive it? It seems like it's a very tight community.
It is a tight community. We've gone, the town of Cochrane, here, that's a great question, and I'm gonna segue into one other thing that we had happen. A few years ago, Cochrane High School wanted to put a windmill on the high school and generate more energy in conjunction with the solar panels. And it absolutely blew up into where at first the windmill didn't ever happen the way it was visualized. The good outcome from it was that we came up with a policy about windmills and things like that for the town, which we didn't have previously. And it was a great lesson in how not to engage the community. So it didn't work out well for the windmill project at all. But we have, I think, a very willing community, but a big part of what we want to work with is we want to lead that with people like the students from Cochrane High, to say to people like myself and that are embedded in their communities to say, this needs to happen and it needs to be a part of what we're doing in our community, because there can be a lot of kickback, and there have been projects that have gone to the court systems over that, and it's killed the project. So we have to be really careful, but I think we've got a good community to work with. We've got one here and then one there.
So that last point was a perfect segue to my question, observation. When you're doing something that has multiple and diverse benefits, some financial, some social, etc., the process of coming to decisions is, in my perception, crucial to have everybody feel like they're at the table. What is your process like? The way you govern the making of decisions of how to, what initiatives to do, etc.
What is our process? I'm not sure I can fully answer that. One of the things that we were careful about today is you've noticed we haven't put anything on the map as to where our sites are, because we haven't engaged the community yet. And Devin actually, I would say, is one of the masters that has completely changed how we do public engagement in Cochrane. He decided when he was running the Colt bus system, buses had been talked about for 8 years before Devin came along. And every time it got shot down because of cost and people didn't know what they were talking about. Instead of having open houses where people all came in, he went to every single community event there was that he could get his little stand at and stood there evenings, weekends, afternoons, and made sure that we went to the people. And I think that's a big part of how we go to our next step, is we go to the people and we talk at all of these groups about what we're trying to do. And that's a big part of what we're working with the Cochrane High School students, is saying each of the students needs to be able to talk about the various different parts of it to show that we're educated, we know what we know, and we're willing to talk. And that's where we start. Maybe more detail if we chat throughout the day on that. Next one was...
My question is very similar. With the community engagement piece, I was very sad to hear about that project being shut down, considering the scale of it and such. Were there some takeaways from that project that, you guys are working on differently and better? And how do those projects start up again, or is it completely shut down? And what were some of the communications that went on that actually shut that project down?
Right, and I think the takeaways from it as a starting point are, don't just go running out there and say we're building a solar farm on this piece of land when you haven't actually talked to people behind the scenes and actually made sure that the people have the information and you have all of your facts. I know one of the presentations when we started with Cochrane High was that there's a perception out there that glare is not a problem off solar panels. Well, it may not be a problem, but there's a perception that it is a problem with the public. You can't just go out there and say glare is not a problem. It's been solved, because there's a perception that there is a problem. And those are things that we want to fully work with. Be very careful how you go out and into the community and start saying things, and that it's factual, and that it's done at the appropriate time with the appropriate people. And the landowners, there's very tight rules around who you have to talk to around all of these projects. And that's one of the problems I think we came up with Cochrane High, is it came out as hey, we're going to build a windmill. This is going to be great. And then immediately all the residents next door just blew up. And went, what? I've been looking at the mountains for 20 years. You're not putting a windmill between me and the mountains? And that's where it started.
Well, I'm getting your facts right. Coming out the gate with, here's the project, here's what it's going to do to you, problem, this is why it's not a problem. So getting ahead of the myth of solar, wind, whatever people are gonna, is gonna cause me cancer. I think they got a lot of comments to that, right? These are things that we all laugh, some people laugh at that, but they're genuine concerns for residents. So if you don't address that, you're out of the gate that, hey, it's a perfect project, and not addressing the concerns and having the facts for the people. It's very much putting your mind at ease very quickly, right? If you're gonna go and stand out in the community and tell them that we're doing this, it's why are we doing it? What are the actual risks? What will impact you? Because there's gonna be something that might impact you. And just considering all that and having a full project ready rather than coming out the gate with an idea. You want to be able to flush some things out and have the agent have them inform the project, but you should have done your research before you can come with that idea.
It's good to make sure those learnings happen.
Yes.
But for high school students to have to go out to community and have to do all that work, that's a heavy weight on their shoulders.
So they're coming with industry experts, right? So the idea is to have them, but they're leaders in it. They've already had it. When we talked about this presentation, I said, okay, we're going to engage the community. 2 weeks later, they say, hey, our presentation's ready. I said, what? I haven't even started the application. So they were well ahead of me and us. And they had things like, they actually bring demos of how a solar panel works. People actually understand it. So they as much as they, wow, it's a lot of weight on them, you guys don't even get credit for this, right? They're just doing it as like a wow. I'm stealing you guys' presentation.
We want high school students and such too that have such a great vision
Yeah.
to be stopped at stage one. So I guess it's
That was
a matter of making sure that they have the tools to get the projects going that are going to make sense for the community.
Exactly. I think that was the problem, is kind of you guys were thrown out there as like, hey, the high school's doing this project without any industry experts, support from the town. That was the big issue there. There wasn't a policy in place from the town that actually says we can do this. There's a lot of issues. So.
It was really, really instrumental for Devin and I to go see the presentation at the high school first, and we went, holy cow, this is not what we were expecting at all. This is way beyond what we were expecting. But we can't go out into the papers with that. It all has to be coordinated. And we have to go to those individuals. We're not putting the direct pressure on the students to do all the work, but they're a supporting cast for the entire operation. And we might have to go door to door to every single landowner before it ever goes to a paper anywhere to say, this is what we're doing. We sit down, get those facts to the people who are actually directly affected, because those are the ones that will blow up and just create havoc for the entire project. And Devin can tell you all about bus stops in front of people's places and things that weren't really issues, but people thought they were issues when they hear the word bus stop. So, timing wise?
I think can we bring up the team from the high school, and we can save those 2 questions maybe for this afternoon, if that's okay, folks? Is that all right? Yeah. I think it's a really neat transition. I get some really sage advice from a mentor of mine on this concept. So bring me in at the beginning of an ally, bring me in at the end of a critic. And it's like what does that engagement look like, right? This is different touches for sort of any one of those stakeholders. And how are you bringing people in as early as possible, and maybe recognize that as you're developing the process, you could have brought people in earlier, and how are they made aware that you're making that consideration for them, right? Like I think it's important. It's the ability to feel a part of a process is a major contribution in making these activities work. So I feel like everybody's been singing your praises, and there's a lot of pressure in terms of 18 years of stewardship right in this presentation.
So, hello, I'm Travis, and I'm Emilio, and we're members from the Cochrane High Sustainable Development Committee. And so, what we do is we've been involved in the community for over 18 years now, and our main kind of focus is on policy changes and infrastructure upgrades. So, yeah, we just finished our Phase 9 project, which was a 50.05 kilowatt solar panel system on the roof of our gymnasium. And yeah, like it was a long, tough project, but it was the perseverance and the passion of our group members that actually got us through it.
Yeah, really had to kind of just see that one till the end. And
yeah, and like a lot of people ask us like, why are we doing this? Because like we don't get credits for this. It's extracurricular. It's just like lots of people just see it as extra work, but it's already been established that sustainability is the way of the future. Like there's no question. We need to move towards that. And to me, like, it's something that we believe in.
Oh yeah,
And
100%.
yeah, like, being a part of this committee is a way that we can invest in our own futures and kind of get involved in what needs to come.
Yeah, well, someone needs to start it, and we thought, well, why not the youth, right? If we're going to be kind of growing up and moving into that kind of work environment, why not, you know, kind of start early, see what we can set up for ourselves and for people even younger than us, right?
Yeah, with this project, there was a lot of challenges. Like, we had to work around a lot of things, and again, with the community, we found it's best to try and get them to open their minds and sort of slowly ease them into the information so that we can, I guess, get them on board and get them interested in our project rather than, like, again, as you guys were saying, just like, hey, we're building a massive solar panel array on our roof, but it was, yeah.
Yeah, we really value the community engagement. It's something we can try to push. And I think at least with our Phase 9 solar panel project, we did a whole Adopt a Panel campaign where we tried to get sponsors for individual panels, and that worked out really great. It seemed a lot more personal for those people who were donating, and
yeah, like, rather than just straight up going around asking for money and not really educating people on this project, we made presentations to businesses, we made a whole Adopt a Panel campaign, sent out emails, just made sure there was an easy way for people to get information on our project, and I believe that that truly helped in our community engagement.
oh yeah.
And yeah, like, we faced an overwhelming amount of rejection throughout our projects. Like, so many people just said, no, like, yeah, your return is not good enough, or they, like, we just really wanted them to see the almost the social benefits as outweighing the economic benefits.
Yeah, and the educational benefits of it too, right? Like, Miss Bennett was talking to us the other day, and she said she actually brought her Science 30 class up on the roof and did, showed them the solar panels, and it's a higher level of understanding when you can actually see it tangibly in front of you.
Yeah, like, what better way to incorporate and get your students to learn on the sustainability of our future than to have a fantastic system on the roof of your own school.
Yeah.
So
It really is a fantastic system.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Well,
that's kind of it. I guess
if you
any
guys
questions?
questions
I'd be
on
happy to answer anything.
How many members in your club?
Around 14, 15?
yeah, it's
I'd
been
say.
fluctuating recently, but yeah,
Yeah.
14-ish.
We're trying to get a bunch of younger students now to hopefully kind of keep the legacy going.
Yeah.
Can you guys give a bit of background? I know the phases, but can you tell everybody about what you guys have done as far as projects?
Yeah. So in the past, one of our first projects was an outdoor classroom that we made, and it was just kind of a fun space for students to learn outside. Just
Benches,
yeah.
rocks.
And then we've installed a solar water heater for our school, and that was quite a while ago, I believe. But that was another solar project, and we have a couple solar panels on our roof from that. And yeah, our most recent project accounted, I believe, for around 8.5% of our school's total power consumption. And all our previous projects, we were around at like 9.6, I believe, % of our entire school covered.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've installed waterless or special toilets that flush using less water as well. But yeah. Any other? Yep.
What was the cost of your last solar project?
About $100,000.
Yeah, about $110,000 all said and done.
And how long did it take to get that together?
14 months from fundraising beginning.
Yeah.
Like, the project was thought up and we were working on it a bit before, but our fundraising phase of it took around 14 months. Yeah.
Was this the project, you put panels on top of your gymnasium?
Yes, this
We
we installed
installed
130 solar
Awesome,
panels.
and is that the one that you use the adopt panel?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
That's an awesome idea.
Yeah, like, yeah, like we were having trouble getting the community engaged and raising money, and this was a great idea to help us actually get people, like, to have your name on a panel and feel like you're really a part of the project.
We got the whole donor plaque too, so anybody who joined in the Adopt a Panel campaign got their name on the wall now. It was a lot easier to ask people for a smaller amount of money than for kind of the big, you know.
Was it all crowdfunded, or did you have some?
We had a couple grants in there. Miss Bennett helped out with that. She did the grants, but all of the community kind of funding came from the students, Adopt a Panel, businesses, local businesses, stuff like that.
Yeah, the Adopt a Panel campaign was like, instead of just getting someone, hey, can we have some money for our project, it was like almost something you could be proud of supporting.
Yeah.
And feel a part of it.
I know a couple people got panels as gifts for, it's my daughter's birthday, so we'll just buy her a solar panel for the spring kind of thing.
Yeah.
You talked about having to deal with rejection or concerns. What are one or two techniques that you developed or went down? That's really working, that you sort of didn't see coming, that you finally found a way to get to a meeting place with people.
Yeah. So we found that actually our presentations to businesses, like we would go straight up there with a nice PowerPoint and get all dressed up like we are. We'd actually, like, as if we could really try and connect with the businesses and present and show them what we're doing and why we're doing it and really get them to understand, that helped a lot. As well as we applied to a ridiculous amount of grants and just probably got about 5% of them, but grants were a big part of our project as well as our community engagement.
It was a lot also about kind of choosing what angle to approach the presentation from, right? Because it's almost every time, as soon as we get to the economic portion of it, the return on investment, that's when we lost everything, right? It's like, it's way too long, stuff like that. So we tell them, right? We wouldn't withhold information, but we definitely wouldn't present it as one of our huge factors that was.
Our main focus was definitely on trying to sell the social benefits of the project, as well as we did one slide kind of showing, like, if Alberta were to move like to this amount of sustainability, this is how much we'd save on like all sorts of other social factors, such as one was like respiratory related problems that we brought up just due to all the emissions, and so.
You had a question?
No, I was going to talk about rejection as well.
Yeah.
Just to give us a feel, I mean, this fundraising clearly is a big part of this, and I think it's a very big project. Like, roughly what percentage came from the community, through the Adopt a Panel program or other those kind of donations, or local businesses?
I think it was around half.
Yeah, a little less than half of our funding came. Yeah.
So, did you experience the opposite of rejection? In other words, you gave a presentation and then all of a sudden you're finding these totally motivated allies.
Yeah.
Get presentations in your name or something. Did that happen to you?
I don't think anything quite happened. We had the town, I guess the town of Cochrane was a huge one.
Yeah.
They help us out a lot, but
the sheer amount of presentations we did really showed us like kind of what worked and what didn't, and like kind of what angle to go at it from, because lots of the time we started out with quite a long presentation and we found like people were getting bored, and we just wanted to keep it short to the point but kind of almost ease them into what we were doing. And
yes, over there.
Will you be sharing your experience in this project with any other schools?
We have not contacted any other schools yet, but we do hope to be a trendsetter for other schools and kind of challenge them to almost beat us or something. But,
Awesome. Can we take the any other questions into the break? I mean, these folks are going to be around here for the next little while. Thank you so much for continuing the legacy. We're going to move into our break here. So back in your seats, and what I'm actually suggesting, if you can move around, so change up the tables a little bit, pack up maybe your little area. If you need to bring dishes out into the hallway, please do that. But when you return back to a different table. We'll be back in our seats at 11 o'clock, and then we're going to move into the presentation. So each of the project presentations.